Remix to Cognition.
How many times in the last, say, 48 hours have you asked yourself, what were they thinking? Somebody cut you off in traffic, maybe, or you're following political happenings, and you're asking yourself, what are they thinking? Well, welcome to my reality, the cognitive scientist. Cognitive science is a rich, sprawling, fantastic world that I'm hoping to share with you through the series of this podcast. Today we'll kind of just talk about what cognitive science is and the branches that it's comprised of. And through the next little while, we'll start to explore different subtopics. We'll talk about new studies. There's no shortage of material to cover here. So thank you for joining me today. Let's dive into what cognitive science is. My name is C.M. McColeman, and I'll be with you while we walk through what cognitive science is, how it can help us understand the world better, and why we should tell everybody we know about it all the time. What is cognitive science? Well, it's a lot of things. Let's look at the words, break them down, and maybe try to understand where this stuff comes from. So the etymology of cognition, etymology is the study of the origin of words. The etymology of cognition comes, like a lot of things that we study, from Greek roots. Gnosis is the Greek noun for knowledge. Over time, perhaps the first cognitive scientist was Aristotle. Over time, works from Greek scholars talking about knowledge were proliferated through to the Latin scholars of the world. They worked with some of this old Greek work, and through its use, conversation, addition, we eventually see the addition of the prefix con, C-O-N. And that prefix means with. You'll see that in words like consensus or congregate. So over use, we start to see con-gnosis together, which is kind of the root source of the word cognition. And if you translate that literally, you get something that looks like with knowing. So if we have an adjective to describe things that are like knowing, we end up using something that looks like cognitive. So literally speaking, maybe the clearest way to think about cognitive science is the science of knowing, which is one of two things, either the coolest thing in the world or the most pretentious. So here we are talking about the science of knowing. What do we know about knowing? It gets really meta, really fast. We know about knowing from a lot of different fields. So cognitive science has really only been a thing since the 1960s. In the 1950s, we saw a cognitive revolution that started from a young linguist named Noam Chomsky, and there were a lot of colleagues and debates that really blew up around the cognitive revolution. That will for sure be its own episode in this podcast. And very quickly, contributions from psychologists, anthropologists, computer scientists, linguistics, and philosophers all came together in an exploration of trying to understand the mind. For that reason, you'll typically see cognitive science as self-identifying as a very interdisciplinary thing. And the reason why is that all of these frameworks team up to be something together that's much better than any of the one framework on its own. Psychology is pretty easy to see in cognitive science, at least for me. My background, my master's degree is in psychology, and I'm working on my PhD there too. Cognitive science is the study of knowledge and mind. Psychology generally is about behavior and mind. They're a pretty close match. Anthropology is a big field on its own, but part of it contains studies of cultures of humans. Cultures share knowledge over time and space. So if you have Ulysses writing a novel back in the day, and you have yourself right now understanding what he might have been talking about, you're transmitting knowledge of your culture over time. Or at least he is. You'll have your turn. Artifacts, anthropological findings, is a really important part of understanding human cognition generally, and helps us understand how the world around us can shape our behavior as well. Computing science contributes both a formal framework for thinking about processes and artificial intelligence. So process is a word you'll hear a lot in cognitive science, and it essentially means a step. So a step you take in order to understand or complete some task or do something or remember something or encode something. There's processes all over the place. And where we start using this word comes from the formal models that computer scientists were using in the days of cognitive science's birth. So thanks for the framework, computer science. Additionally, computer science talks about artificial intelligence. Remember, we just said cognitive science literally is talking about the science of knowing. Artificial intelligence is a way to formalize intelligence. It's a very, very clear relationship to what we're interested in as cognitive scientists and how we can understand our own systems in a formal way. Interestingly, even if you're a pure AI person and you're not really interested in human cognition on its own, you might be interested to learn about this world because taking the best of human behavior can help inform how to make better AI agents, robots, if you will. Similarly, knowing about artificial intelligence systems that work well, or, not always the case the same, as humans, will help us understand how humans process information as well. So by that I mean sometimes seeing how a system fails in a human-like way can tell us a lot about humans versus a system that is perfect while humans really flounder. Simple addition might be an example of that. Linguistics is a study of language. A lot of people have contended in the past that consciousness itself wouldn't even be possible without language. This is contentious, it's still a source of debate, and it probably will be for some time. But language is definitely a way that we understand what it is that's going through our heads, or the heads of our neighbors. Understanding the processes behind abstract representation of ideas and concepts and things in the world, and how to communicate those things in the world to other people is a really important part of understanding how knowledge is encoded, how it's transferred, how we learn. Linguistic mistakes can tell us about typical pathways in our processing. Linguistics is a very rich source of information for cognitive science. Philosophy isn't all of this. Philosophy is kind of the predecessor of every single field out there. A lot of contemporary philosophers describe themselves as philosophers of mind. That's the most clear contribution of philosophy to cognitive science, but all of this stems from ancient Greek work in philosophy. Prior to that, a lot of people were probably thinking about things like, when I see the color red, how do I know that you're seeing the same color red? I don't imagine that's a purely modern concern. Philosopher, linguist, psychologist alike, we all share a passion in understanding what it is that allows us to understand. Most people outside of these very academic, formal worlds share the same sort of concern. Why is it that I am capable of having this conversation with another person? That's a thought I've had a lot. How is it that I know how to interpret what you're saying to me when we're just moving air through space? These are really, really rich and fascinating problems, and there's a great poetry in reflecting inward and understanding what it is that hosts and allows your own cognitive system to work. What's more fun, I think, is to find the opportunities where your cognitive system fails. Next time, we'll explore some of the classic examples of cognition not really working out so great.